Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. Today on the OGS Ohio Roots podcast, we're joined by author and genealogist Willis Smiley. He has just launched a fascinating new historical fiction novel on Substack entitled God Haunted, The Possible Story of Thomas Ewart, based on his extensive genealogical research and real 19th century family records. The book explores the dramatic and still unsolved arson attacks that targeted his five-time great-grandfather's home in Marietta, Ohio, between 1879 and 1880. Through letters, photographs, archival discoveries, Willis brings to life the story of Judge Thomas Ewart, his devout temperist activist wife, and a family caught in the middle of suspicion and scandal. I'm very excited to hear more about this gripping blend of history, mystery, and his own family history. So I hope you enjoy this conversation today with Willis Smiley. Well, I'd like to thank Willis Smiley for joining me today on the OGS Ohio Roots podcast to discuss a pretty interesting project that he's working on. Willis, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure.
The first question I ask all my guests, because I'm always very curious about how we got the disease of genealogy, is what was it that kind of sparked your interest in your family history and genealogy?
Yes, it's a great question that I often reflect on because it's set up a lifelong hobby for me. I would say it all started in eighth grade, at the end of eighth grade in late 80s, 1988. In California, we were required to have, I guess, a final history project at the end of that year. And I was struggling to select a topic, and I expressed this to my grandmother, and she left the room momentarily and returned with sort of frayed copy of a self-published book called The Danas and the Dana Farm, written in Belpre, Ohio, by a woman named Florence Dale Burridge, who's a cousin of our family. And it was self-published in the 1930s.
Okay.
And it told the family history of the Danas, who came down the Ohio River from Massachusetts in 1788 to settle in Belpre and the Marietta area. And it sort of outlined the struggles of the family in those first few generations. And of course, had the obligatory family list with all the descendants, I think something like 1,200 people at that point. And of course, my grandmother and her sister were listed there as some of the descendants of that original family. And so she explained to me this, this is also your family, and this is your family history. And so I went on to write a history project about those first few years of the Dana family in Belpre and their struggles and hardships that they faced. So, and that kind of kicked off my lifelong interest in genealogy.
It's interesting because it reinforces what a lot of us, the advice a lot of genealogists give, which is talk to your living relatives before you start pursuing the dead ones. And it sounds like in talking to your grandmother, you made a lot of progress there. So talk to me about why you're here today, Willis.
So part of the journey over all these years is uncovering a story about some of my ancestors in Ohio that has been a roadblock. I think was the, or did you call it a wall? I think in your brick wall.
Brick wall.
Yeah. One of my greatest brick walls was the impetus for writing a historical fiction novel about some of my ancestors. And they were a family in Marietta. My grandfather, this is my fifth great grandfather, and his second wife. Thomas Ewart was his name, and he was a prominent attorney, businessman. He served in the Ohio 1850 Constitutional Convention. It's a fairly prominent guy, big family. His house is still standing in Marietta up on Putnam Street. After all of this information that my grandmother and her sister and her aunts, my great aunts, provided me over the years, nobody ever mentioned this small fact that I came across in the archives in Ohio, which was that I was going through newspaper microfiche at one of my visits to the archives there to do more research, and I saw a small entry that said, last night the Ewart's barn burned to the ground. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I clipped it and put it into my file. And then on that same trip, a few days later, I came across another entry 9 months after. So the first fire was in 1879 in April. There was another entry in the January 1880 newspaper that said a fifth fire attempt, arson attempt, had happened at the Ewart home. The family barely made it out alive, and there was much
Wow.
unrest in Marietta about what was happening.
Yeah.
And this was my sort of eye-opening moment because up to this point, if you read these family histories or you listen to your grandmothers, mostly they'll tell you everyone was, strong and valiant and intelligent and upstanding, and
Right. Right.
you get these sort of superlatives that are always positive and never are, at least in my family, are these kinds of stories told. So this started, I would say, like a 10-year process of researching what really happened to this family.
Mhm.
And they were very religious, of course. I would even argue maybe fundamentalist at this, when we look back from our
Mhm.
perspective today.
Sure.
They were temperance workers. My step grandmother, I found one notation in the archives in Marietta that mentioned her as part of a notorious group of women in southeastern Ohio.
Mm.
Just one notation, though, no other information.
Right.
And then my grandfather was on the board and an investor in one railroad. Simultaneously, he was lobbying in Columbus to have a competitor's railroad condemned. So I took a lot of these facts and sort of tried to figure out what was happening. In addition to that, going to Marietta and figuring out who was arrested, and then why, and what was their motivation. In the end,
Right.
nobody was ever convicted, though a whole
Okay.
cast of characters were certainly implicated. And after years of sort of hitting brick walls with this stuff, a friend of mine over brunch in San Francisco one day said, "Why don't you like to write? Why don't you tell us what you think happened?
Right.
Incorporate everything you know, and then embellish."
Sure.
And of course, with the things I had found out about this family, there was a great story, I think, that could be told because they seem, despite their righteousness, they seem to have a lot of enemies,
Hmm.
or maybe in spite of their righteousness, they had a lot of enemies around town, and one could understand why people would want to run the Ewarts out of Marietta.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think, what role or what impact did their temperance viewpoints, you think, have on the whole situation? Was, I mean, when you're talking about the story, you said there are a number of different folks who were kind of people of interest, I guess.
yeah.
Did they come from all over kind of their social map? Were there folks from the railroad? Were there folks from the temperance movement? How does all that play into the story you're telling?
Well, the arrests involved several criminals in town who had been implicated for murder. Uh, the the man who was called to testify against those two was one of the most notorious criminals of the time in southeastern Ohio. Last name was Kuntz,
Okay.
and very fascinating how all these characters got involved. There was also a police officer or deputy sheriff who was arrested as
Hmm.
well. So it seemed to I mean, to me, wasn't surprised to see criminals involved, but then when a sheriff or a police officer got arrested as well, I
Right.
thought that was interesting. There was also rumors in town that one of a young male family member, a young boy who was a distant cousin, was implicated as
Okay.
well, which I've never been able to find more information
Hmm.
about who that person even was, frankly, despite knowing the family tree pretty well. And there's a self-published family history called sitting somewhere here on my desk called The Chronicles of the Ewarts,
Okay.
written by Carol King Heckman, who's a cousin of mine, distant cousin. It was published in 1969.
Okay.
And she has one line in her book, or maybe two lines, that says, despite everything they did for Marietta in terms of building the community and giving back, their temperance activity led to these attacks. And they ultimately fled and moved to Grandview, which I think was a dry town at the time.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it is probably in real life, and maybe someone much smarter than me and has more patience can find out what really happened.
Right.
So I think it probably was the temperance work, but I can't imagine my grandfather wasn't creating enemies in his business dealings, particularly around the railroad. So,
do you think the fact of Marietta being a river town in Ohio, and seeing a lot of river traffic, which tended to deal with saloons and alcohol, might have played a role in folks not being pleased with his temperance activities?
Yeah, from what I understand about the temperance work in Ohio was that some of the towns and counties were having tremendous success farther up and north and away from the river, as you point out, whereas Marietta very much had all that river traffic and lots of business, lots of commerce, lots of people coming through all the time, coming and going, and the saloons were a natural part of that life. And so what started out as what I would guess is a fairly pious community when it was first settled with a lot of aspirations and ideals,
Sure.
Was probably hard for those original families to see it in their minds devolve into something a little more, let's just say diverse as it became. So
yeah. When you're writing this, because there are some great authors out there who do fictionalized history. Robert Graves from wrote about Claudius, and of course Alan Eckert's one of the most well known who writes about Ohio, parts of Ohio. How do you balance the facts that you've accumulated about your family with the speculation when you're writing a fictionalized account?
I mean, I've been working on this for 10 years. And I have a full-time corporate job, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm just the slowest writer on the planet. I've had a lot of distractions, but for the first probably 6 or 7 years, I wanted very much to try to tell a dry story with some embellishment, obviously bringing life to the people particularly of my family. I have, the women in my family gave me photos of these family members. I have their letters still. The archives in Ohio have a lot of information about this family as well. So there's a lot to bring them to life. But as I progressed with that first draft and eventually started to workshop it at Drexel University here in Philadelphia, I got a lot of feedback from the other writers. So I don't know if you know about workshopping, but you bring a handful of chapters every week to pass around and to your fellow writers, and they do the same. And as time went on, I did this for 3 semesters. They said, this is a very dramatic and compelling story. Can you release yourself from the facts and this sort of drier tale for which you really don't know what happened, and kind of lean into the family dynamics that you imagine were going on? And so, long story short, to answer your question, I'm not sure I'm balancing very well the facts with what might have with where the story has gone in terms of the drama that I'm building. I mean, the characters, the family members are real life people. They lived in Marietta, of course. The fires were real; those really happened. The arson attempts against their life. I've tried to layer in everything I've ever learned about them, but that's still not enough to tell us a compelling story, I think, without sort of embellishing a little bit. So.
Hi, everyone. Noel Poirier here, Executive Director of the Ohio Genealogical Society and your host for the Ohio Roots podcast. Did you know you can help preserve the past and empower the future? Your donation to the Ohio Genealogical Society helps protect vital family history records and supports research for generations to come. Visit www.ogs.org/donate and give today. Thank you so much for your support. Join us on Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025, for the Mavernine Harshman OGS Librarian Day, a special event at the Ohio Genealogical Society Library designed for librarians, society members, and anyone passionate about genealogy and local history. The day begins with a collaborative session on successful genealogy programming ideas, led by the Northeast Ohio local family history librarians. And the afternoon continues with a panel discussion on how libraries support genealogical research in today's evolving landscape. A guided tour of the OGS library and archives rounds out the day with opportunities for independent research and exploration. Whether you're looking for programming inspiration, research strategies, or community connection, this event offers valuable takeaways for all. For more information and to register, visit the OGS events calendar at www.ogs.org/events. When do you decide to be historically faithful or historically accurate, and when do you decide to take the creative liberties for the sake of the story? Like, where is it in the storytelling that you go from, okay, this was from a letter, but now this is what I'm saying happened based on what I've read, all the information I've gathered?
I think, well, I feel this is where I start to feel more like a Hollywood producer, where I'm fudging with timelines.
Sure.
My understanding is, for instance, that the temperance work in Ohio was largely happening in the early part of the 1870s, and I think peaked perhaps in around 1874 or 75. The arson attempts against the Ewerts were in 1879 to 1880. So I'm pulling forward the arson attempts to that, or the temperance work that my step great grandmother was involved in, as if it's kind of just happening, and is something new and novel, with the exception of a few neighboring counties. And so that is not historically accurate at all, but it fits my story, and helps to sort of build the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using, the railroad situation, for instance. There's the Marietta and Cincinnati line is the competing railroad, which really did exist and had it's fascinating to go read. There's a bunch of studies about it. It was a troubled railroad line indeed.
Mm-hmm.
It was the line that my grandfather was trying to get condemned in Columbus, but the railroad he was on was sort of a few, 5 or more years prior to that point, when the MNC was having trouble. So it also had a tremendously long name. And so for the sake of fiction, the historical fiction part of this, I made up I didn't make up, but I had him be involved in the Muskingum Railroad, just to make it simpler.
Sure.
I guess, I don't know if that answers your question, but those are places where I'm,
because it's a challenge. I mean, any of us who do family history, I think family historians are different than genealogists, in my opinion. Because for me, being a family historian, I'm maybe far more interested in the history of my family, what they did, their lives, everything about that. Whereas often genealogy is very siloed into, births, marriages, and deaths, and tracing specific lineages. Yeah. So I think as more people are exposed to family history, I think they're going to be very interested in things like telling stories of their families. And so for me, when you talk about all of your genealogical research, but also your other pursuit with this, how has that helped you kind of form or shape a personal connection to your family, to this particular ancestor, but also to your family history in general?
You mean, how is the family history?
Yeah, has it strengthened that connection to this particular individual and your family history, or are you feeling a little bit kind of divorced from it because you're looking at it from a fairly academic viewpoint, or from an authorship viewpoint?
I feel like I'm obsessed with these people in an unhealthy way. Like, I think about them constantly, and I have for a very long time, because ultimately I don't think we'll ever know what happened.
Right.
And all of the people who could have told us, died, I think in the 1950s. They'd already long gone. And so I feel very connected to them, especially since I can pull their letters out of the drawer here, and I can look at their photos. Like, they do feel like real people to me, not just names and dates, birth, marriage, death, the usual things that are part of our genealogical research that we're all familiar with. Yeah.
When you talk about the letters, what were some of the most valuable resources that you used to develop and flesh out this story?
Okay, so I think that's a really great question, because obviously, having photos, having letters, having Carol Carol King Heckman's, tremendous tome of information on the Ewerts was helpful. But what I found most interesting, the letters primarily in that sort of crazy, scrawly letter, writing that you can't really read, go on and on about God.
Hmm.
That is it. And if it's not about God directly, then it's about, or faith,
Right.
it's about other neighbors or cousins and their faith.
Right.
And then very occasionally there'll be two lines about, so and so sick, and here's what's happening at the farm. So I didn't. While they did provide some insight into their religious beliefs, well, tremendous actually, it didn't give me much else. What I found most valuable was the newspapers.
Okay. Sure.
And unfortunately, I mean, in some ways we live in a great time and era because so much has been digitized,
Hmm.
and it's at our fingertips. But there's so much that still is sitting in dusty drawers in Ohio that
Right.
you can't access without going there to those
Yeah.
places. And I know that's a privileged thing because not everyone can afford to travel for research. But if you can, I highly encourage it, because the most insight I gained, in particular to this story, was the newspaper articles written about the family during this era
Hmm.
that spoke to what was happening. In addition to that, if you keep going backwards into the 19th century, back to 1850 with the Constitutional Convention, there's so much information about how my grandfather participated in that, in those meetings, and his thinking, because it's all documented, though
Right.
every vote is documented, but everything else is there that I would have never gotten from letters or this family history book or any of those things.
Right.
So
Right. Talk to me a little bit about the title. Where did you come up with the idea? I should tell people the title is God Haunted: The Possible Story of Thomas Ewart. Where did the
yeah.
God Haunted part come from?
So God haunted is this idea that you desperately want to believe in God, but you don't feel like God is there, or so you're not an atheist. You definitely understand that there's a higher order, but that higher order, whoever that may be, does not speak back to you, or you don't feel anything, and you're looking around you, and everyone else is falling over themselves with their spirituality, which I kind of feel like is definitely the vibe in the 19th century. I mean, especially from these letters. Uh, so much spirituality, at least with my family, that surprised me. Um, and so this idea is that you are someone who doesn't feel that, though you want to, and you sort of hide it with everyone around you, because it would be blasphemous to admit that you don't feel anything, and now you doubt and you're unsure that God really exists. So Thomas Ewart is, in my story and my telling of things, God haunted, and this is sort of the central idea of the book, is that everything he's doing, he's asking God for guidance, but God never speaks to him, and so he relies heavily on his wife, my step great grandmother, who is ultra religious, and she of course is sort of this radical temperance worker, and sees everything through the eyes, as God's will in her eyes. And so he sort of makes a lot of decisions in his life that he hopes God approves of, and he looks to his wife for that spiritual agreement, but he's unsure. And this ultimately leads the family to destruction in the end.
That's
It's a
fascinating.
tragic book. It's not meant to
Now,
be.
don't give away the ending because you want folks to read it. Um, do you see your project? And I'm not as plugged into the environment, the writer's environment per se, but do you see this project as part of a larger trend of family historians kind of writing to kind of flesh out the stories of their ancestors' lives, whether they're doing that strictly with fact, or whether they're expanding on it with their own assumptions?
Yeah, imagination. I I'm publishing on Substack because obviously I don't have a book deal. I'm not sure I'll ever get one. I'm not sure I'm a good enough writer, but we'll see. Um, But I'm publishing on Substack, and for the listeners who don't know, it's an online platform for creative people, whether you write novels, essays, poetry, even artists
Hmm.
are there, including famous journalists, famous authors. It's sort of a place where you can go and publish. You can charge for your work. I don't do that. This is more of a place for me to share and get feedback
Hmm.
and get eyes on my work. In that, that's in the last few years, Substack's exploded. It's sort of like the old internet. It's lovely, actually. It's not toxic. And and in that space, there is, a sub niche of genealogy and family
Okay.
history.
Interesting.
And the folks who are there, who've been there for a long time and have great newsletters and lots of amazing advice, immediately wrote to me, a few of them when I started to publish, and I welcome, sort of introduced myself to that community, and said like they wondered if this was the next evolution of family
Okay.
history and genealogy.
Interesting.
So that told me that not a lot of people, at least in that world, are doing it
Hmm.
yet, and they're still sort of fixated on the names and dates, and
Right.
filling in every fact that they can verify.
Right.
So
I know from my experience with the Ohio Genealogical Society and our annual conference every year, one of the themes that has come up in a number of their presentations there is storytelling.
yeah,
Is being able to tell the stories of your family members as opposed to just doing the nuts and bolts kind of aspects of it. And I
there
think
are
that
a
there's a
handful.
skill set there.
Yeah, yes. And there are a handful of people on Substack who I follow who do wonderful work in telling a story that I would say is what we were talking about earlier: less embellished, less
Hmm.
imaginative, and
Sure.
more just heavily researched and very detailed
Hmm.
about these people's lives. And they're picking relatives with compelling stories, and
Right.
it's fascinating
Yeah.
to read.
If somebody wanted to kind of start doing something similar to what you're doing with a family member, what's a bit of advice you'd give them?
About writing their own family history, or
Well, yeah, family
writing a
history and,
novel.
writing it from your approach.
Well, I would say first, try to understand as much as you can based on the evidence that's out there.
Hmm.
And this will help to sort of direct you, I think, to the story you want to tell. And I think important, and alongside of that research, is to identify the gaps. What don't you know? Because I think that's where the story and your imagination and thinking,
Right.
you know your relatives the best. One of the things I said earlier about everyone in my family being described as valiant and intelligent and strong and not a weakling, by the way, and that's a quote in from one of the family history books, cracks me up because I live on this planet today. I know humans and I know my family, the people who descended from these people, and I can
Right.
tell you, while some of it's true, most of it is. I mean, these are human beings with they're complex, and they all go through a lot of stuff in their lives, and that's the compelling story. So look, while you're filling in the history of each relative or ancestor, what are the gaps? What are you missing? Why did they leave that hometown they lived in for 30 years, didn't turn up on the census for 20 years, and then suddenly are halfway across the country? And
Mhm.
you can't understand what happened. You've hit a brick wall. Well, then that's the place, that's the story to tell.
Yeah.
Fill in the gaps there, if in fact you're attracted to this idea of sort of writing something
Yeah.
historical fiction.
Where can people find your work, Willis?
So it's on Substack. I'm not sure if you can provide the link on your
Yeah.
website, but it's
Sure.
blisssmiley.substack.com, and it will
Okay.
take you to the landing page where every chapter is there. I think I'm up to chapter 12 at this point. I'm
Okay.
publishing about one chapter a week,
Oh, okay.
and so it'll probably go through next spring before we're done.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Willis Smiley, thank you so much for joining me today on the OGSI High Reads podcast and sharing your God haunted, the possible story of Thomas Ewart with us, and your thinking about how you do it, and just your insight. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I want to thank Willis for sharing his incredible family story with us. For those interested in reading God Haunted, The Possible Story of Thomas Ewart, you can find it on Substack, where the first 11 chapters are available now, with new chapters released every few weeks. Subscribing there is free. It's a wonderful way to follow along as history, genealogy, and storytelling come together. We'll share the links so you can start exploring this remarkable journey into Ohio's past. Again, thank you to Willis for joining me today, and thank you for listening to the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. Curious about your family's Ohio past? The Ohio Genealogical Society is your gateway to uncovering generations of family history. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just starting your journey, the OGS offers expert resources, local chapters, exclusive online records, online and in-person programs, and a passionate community ready to help you. Join today and bring your family story to life, because your family's history matters. Visit ogs.org to start your discoveries.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Noel Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.